My heart was racing as I burst out of the closet, dashed to the top of the stairs, and with a snap of my head flung the bag into the air and on its way to the entrance hall below. Watching it bounce down the steps, I could only pray that Bunnicula would remain asleep inside, so that he would be limp and likely not get hurt. Seeing the bag that was heading straight toward her, Miss Pickles screamed as some other woman I didn't know jumped back, twisted her heel, and fell into the arms of the man behind her. Catching her, the man dropped a tray of cookies, which landed with a clatter. The noise made Howie howl, which made Mr. Monroe run into the room, which made Howie run out of the room, which made Mr. Monroe trip over Howie, which made the platter of crackers and cheese he was carrying go flying. The black bag landed with a thud at the bottom of the stairs, spewing its contents out into the room. I strained to see if Bunnicula was safe, but all I could make out were people's legs going wild trying not to step on cookies or crackers or cheese or whatever had spilled out of the bag. Miles covered his ashen face and shouted, "No!" as Edgar took off from his shoulder and began circling the house, opening and closing his beak in soundless frenzy. As if they could hear him, the crows in the yards began to screech a discordant chorus, and at that moment, the front door opened and Mrs. Monroe and Toby entered. Toby was carrying something in his arms. Even from the top of the stairs, I could see what, or should I say who, it was. There, blissfully asleep, was Bunnicula. "Chester?" I said as calmly as I could manage under the circumstances. "Got a moment? I think we need to have a little chat." "We still don't know what's in the bag," Chester replied. I didn't even have to turn to know that he was bathing his tail. As for the bag, all was about to be revealed, if not understood. "What in the world is going—" Mrs. Monroe started to say, when Edgar made what appeared to be a nosedive for Bunnicula. Toby yelped, turned away, and clutched the bunny to him, forcing Edgar to change direction and fly out the open door. "Come back!" Miles cried as the crows outside cheered Edgar's escape. Kyle ran to the door and closed it. "Don't anybody panic," he said. "If we go into the basement, the birds can't get us. Mr. Monroe, did you find any plywood yet for the windows? I'll help you put it up. I know how to use a hammer. I've been using a hammer since I was 5. Remember that time I had that swollen thumb? Well, I can use a hammer better than that now. Boy, this is exciting. It's like being right inside one of your books, Mr. Tanner." Miss Pickles said, "I should say it is. I've been talking to students for years about books coming to life in their minds. I had no idea they could come to life in their very own houses." Everyone began to laugh then. Everyone but Miles Tanner, that is. He was staring in horror at what lay on the floor at his feet. Pete was looking too. "Are these yours, Mr. Tanner?" he asked. Miles lifted his gaze to Pete's eyes. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. After a few seconds of shocked silence, he ran up the stairs, sending Chester and me into a tailspin as he whizzed past. The guest room slammed shut with a resounding bang! Chester and I made our way quickly down the stairs to see what all the fuss was about. Everyone was looking down at the mess on the floor now, the cheese and crackers, the cookies and trays, and the contents of the black bag. I could hardly believe what I saw. The floor was covered with stuffed animals. Pete was the first one to speak. "You guys," he said to Kyle and Toby between clenched teeth, "if either of you tells anybody at school that M.T. Graves travels with a bag full of stuffed animals—" "Why would we do that?" Kyle interrupted. "Hey, I used to have stuffed animals." "I still do," Toby piped up. "Okay, admittedly it's a little weird for an old guy to have stuffed animals," Kyle went on, "but what's the big deal? To each his own, right? Besides, we have bigger worries right now. Those birds are sounding pretty mean. We better get some plywood and—" Miss Pickles laid her hand gently on Kyle's shoulder. "I don't think we need to be worried about the crows," she told him. "No?" "No, but we may need to be worried about Mr. Tanner." "I agree," said the man who turned out to be Pete's teacher. "I think he was embarrassed that we all saw this." The other woman knelt down and started putting the stuffed animals back into the black bag. "Peter," she said, "I think you're the one to talk to him." "Me?" Pete squeaked. "Why me?" "You're the contest winner," the woman said. "You're the reason Mr. Tanner is here." "And you're the principal," said Pete, "so I guess I better do what you say, huh, Miss Kipper?" Miss Kipper smiled. "I'm off duty, Peter. I'm not telling you what to do, just what I think." Mrs. Monroe took the sleeping rabbit out of Toby's arms and handed him to Pete. "Take Bunnicula up, knock on the door, and ask Mr. Tanner if you can put him back in his cage." "Well, where was he anyway?" Pete asked. "Sleeping under the porch," said Toby. I could hear Chester muttering something about having made a teensy little glitch in the logic department, as Pete tucked Bunnicula in one arm, grabbed the bag of stuffed animals with his other hand, and started up the stairs. He was about halfway up when Miles appeared at the top. "Forgive me," Miles said in his soft, gravelly voice. "It was rude of me to run away like that. Rude and cowardly." "It's okay, Mr. Tanner," said Pete. "I was just coming up to—" "No, I will come down," Miles said. "We will talk." And so it was that we gathered in the living room to learn the truth about Edgar and Miles. After settling himself into the corner of the sofa, Miles looked around the room and let out an enormous sigh. Just as he was about to speak, Miss Pickles sat down next to him. "It's all right," she told him in a reassuring voice. "You're among friends." Chester perked up his ears at that. "Interesting," he muttered to me. "Sounds like we're about to hear a—" "You may wonder why I asked to stay here with you," Miles began. "Normally I would stay in a hotel. Well, there really is no normally, since I never visit schools. I never go anywhere. But you would think that I would want to stay in a hotel. You would think so, except that I wanted to meet your pet specie because I wanted Bunnicula." "Confession!" Chester hissed in my ear. "Here it comes. I was right after all." Miles cleared his throat and glanced nervously about the room. "I was hoping, you see, that Bunnicula might inspire me," Pete said. "But I thought Edgar was your, what's that word again, Mr. Brooks?" "Muse," said the English teacher. My muse, yes," Miles said. "He is that, my muse and my companion. My world, really." "But what about your other pets?" Toby asked. "Yeah, what about the wolves, the bats, the alligators, and—" Miles held out his hands to stop Kyle from going on. "There are no other pets." The room fell silent. "The wolves, the bats, the castle on the mountaintop, the sorcery, all of them are as invented, as imaginary as M.T. Graves himself. All in the interest of making the author of Fleshcrawlers series creepy at best, and interesting at the very least." "But you said you got your ideas from your life," Toby chimed in, "so your life must be pretty interesting, right?" "I write scary books because I am scared," Miles admitted. "That's how my ideas come from my life." "But you write the scariest books ever," Pete said. The color was rising in his cheeks. "I don't understand. What could you be scared of?" Miles turned to Miss Pickles, who nodded and smiled at him in a "go ahead, you can do it" sort of way. I had the feeling these two may have talked more than we knew when Miss Pickles had dropped off the pretzel crust jello mold. "I'm scared of dogs, for one thing," Miles began. Howie gasped. "And cats," Chester purred. "And people. I'm scared of going to the school tomorrow. I'm scared of everything." "Are you scared of Bunnicula?" Pete asked. He was still cradling the sleeping rabbit in his arms. Miles looked fondly at the bunny. "No, I'm not. I guess that's because I never had a rabbit bark at me." This made everybody laugh, even Miles himself, but then he grew serious again. "You see, I've always been so scary-looking, so ugly, even as a boy, that dogs barked at me, cats hissed at me, other children laughed at me, so I learned to keep to myself. A writer's life was the perfect life for me. I could have my revenge on the animals that tormented me by transforming them into things even uglier and scarier than I ever was. And I could be alone." Miss Pickles started to object, but Miles put his hand on her arm to stop her. I noticed that she let him keep it there. "But then my books become popular, and there were requests for me to speak and visit schools. I didn't dare, even though at times I thought the loneliness would kill me. Then Edgar came into my life, and everything changed. I didn't want to transform the animals in my stories anymore. I wanted to stop being afraid of animals in real life. I wanted to stop being afraid, period. I thought perhaps if I could get to know other animals and replace Edgar with someone else—" "Why do you have to replace Edgar?" Pete asked. "Marjorie, Miss Pickles, was right. He's a wild animal. He doesn't belong in a cage or even a house, which is only a bigger cage after all." "But hasn't Edgar always been with you? Wouldn't he miss you if you set him free?" "I believe he would miss me. I know I would miss him. But no, he hasn't always been with me. It was a stormy night almost 2 years ago, a very windy night, when I heard a thump at my front door. I opened it, and there on my doorstep lay a wounded baby crow. I couldn't believe it, the image of a crow. Edgar Allan Crow had been part of the Fleshcrawlers series from the beginning, but there was never a real Edgar Allan Crow, until now. I nursed him back to health, and he stayed with me. We became devoted friends. Edgar was, as you say, my muse. I stopped feeling lonely and I began to write with renewed vigor. But then one day a large murder of crows appeared in the yard, and I saw a yearning in Edgar I'd never seen before. He wanted to be with his own kind. I was afraid I would lose him, especially after the time he succeeded in escaping. I saw him fly to another crow, and I understood that... "Aha!" said Chester. "The head crow. Now we're going to get the confession." Edgar had fallen in love. "Or not," said Chester. "He's courting," Miss Pickles interjected. "That's the reason for the bowing we've seen him do with the female crow." Miles' ashen face turned slightly pink. Was I imagining it, or was he blushing? Fearing that Edgar would leave me, I began to have trouble writing. I truly believed I couldn't do it without Edgar, and my confidence wasn't helped by the fact that since a certain boy wizard came along, my sales have plummeted like Niagara Falls. Hoping to improve sales and get me writing again, my publisher came up with the idea of this contest. When I read Pete's letter, I thought I had my answer. I would stay in a house with dogs and cats to overcome my fear, and I would spend time with the most unusual rabbit in hopes that he would inspire me. He has done that, and even more. In a very short time I've grown quite fond of him, and now I must ask something difficult for me to ask. Just then we were startled by a loud tapping on the window behind the sofa. There, peering in at us, was Edgar Allan Crow. Yes, Miles said, turning to look at him. I was just getting to it. Edgar opened his mouth soundlessly, and Miles turned back. He looked around the room, finally bringing his eyes to rest on Pete and the black and white bundle in Pete's arms. "Peter," said Miles, "I know this is a great deal to ask of you and your family, but might I have Bunnicula?"